The effect of student engagement strategies on 7th grade research assessment scores and confidence in research practices. The purpose of this study was to determine the effect of student engagement strategies on 7th grade student ethical research assessment scores, as well as student confidence in ethical research practices. It was important to me that a multitude of strategies were included in order to enhance student engagement, and the strategies chosen included formative assessments, games, flipped instruction, project-based learning, student choice, and group work. Because I wanted all students to experience the treatment and did not want a control group and an experimental group, I selected the research design type of one group pre-test post-test. My quantitative data included ethical research assessment scores, and my qualitative data included confidence in ethical research practices survey results. The result of this study suggested that varied student engagement strategies over the course of learning about ethical research improved both student test scores related to ethical research as well as student confidence in research practices. How can we achieve true student engagement, and what will that mean for learning? These were the research questions that guided my research as I began to look at student engagement. Researchers Ramelli, Walk, Taylor, and Parsons laid the foundation for this study, and I agree with their assertions, especially those that include that motivation is something that we create with students, not due to them, that classrooms and curriculums must be interesting, intellectual, critical, creative, purposeful, communal, and highly relevant, that by selecting multiple strategies, any one of those elements may not have worked every time, but that multiple together in tandem likely will. And also that our students of today engage in far different ways than their parents, and that the changes in my classroom were necessary. The first research-based strategy I looked at was formative assessment. Research suggests that this is a must, and that feedback gained during formative assessment is powerful. Like in this quote, it says, "The best teachers recognize the importance of ongoing assessments and continual adjustments on the part of both teacher and student as the means to achieve maximum performance." The next research strategy I looked at were games. I knew that I needed a change in atmosphere in this unit, and this research-based way appeals to students as more students than ever are learning from games as they address different learning style, and it was a great way to create a better community and to have a little bit of fun. The third research-based strategy I examined was flipped instruction. There's a great deal of research on this strategy, and it is a great 21st century tool. It is proven to enhance student engagement and was significant because I wanted the increased interaction and engagement that Helene W. Marshall suggests is possible with flipped instruction. Project-based learning was another resource that I researched. Students need relevance in real-life scenarios, and this is another research-based strategy that increases student engagement because it appeals to their need for relevance, real-life scenarios, and the removal of theoretical and text-based learning. The last two strategies I examined were student choice and group work. These two I needed to work in tandem, and I wanted them to be interwoven into the other engagement strategies chosen. This is because we know that students are used to customizing just about everything in their lives and that they are naturally social creatures. I wanted to allow student choice in a way that still provided me the opportunity to collect the data that I needed, and I wanted to allow group work in order to allow students the opportunity to learn to enhance their communication skills and then again to improve their academic performance. Overall, this quote did a great job of summarizing everything that I was looking at. The themes and ideas that surface most often in the literature on student engagement are embedded collaboration, integrated technology, inquiry-based learning, assessment for learning, and making learning interdisciplinary and relevant to real life. All essential components and all the basis of the strategies that I selected. Because when student engagement increases through the use of these purposeful strategies, I believe that everyone benefits. My data collection plan was to focus on my 7th grade ELA students, of which there are around 143. I selected the one group pre-test post-test design again to make sure that all students were able to receive the treatment, and I collected both quantitative and qualitative data. This was a 2-week unit on ethical research, and the necessary materials really come down to simply computer access for both students and teachers. Although the online tools that I used were listed here, I also believe that if computers are not accessible, that these strategies could be replicated on paper and pencil activities. It's also important to note that the formative assessments that were given through the use of Nearpod and Socrative were selected because of their ability to give immediate feedback to students as a part of the formative assessments. For my quantitative data, I gave ethical research assessments. The pretest was given the day before the start of the unit and the post-test given on the last day of the unit. These assessments address the learning targets of avoiding plagiarism, citing sources, conducting research, quoting, paraphrasing, and summarizing sources in writing. For each of the student scores, I took a look at their percentage, and those got converted to achievement levels. I then looked at the percent of students who scored in each of the achievement levels to compare my data. For the qualitative data, students took a Confidence in Ethical Research Practices survey. The initial survey was given 2 days before the start of the unit, and the final survey given on the last day of the unit. Students ranked their confidence of the same learning targets assessed on the pretest and post-test on a scale of 1 to 5. And my goal was that the percent of students who agreed or strongly agreed would be 80% or higher. The way that the strategies were implemented were that I started with flipped instruction, group work, and formative assessment to introduce the research concepts. I used games to solidify that knowledge, a small research project that was infused with student choice and formative assessment to apply that knowledge, and then created a project-based learning experience where students examined environmental action plans based on research about environmental problems to create an interdisciplinary opportunity for students. The ethical research assessment scores were analyzed in 2 ways, and although I originally intended to only analyze them comparatively in a bar graph, the comparison using an area model graph was even more descriptive. Student ethical research confidence levels were also analyzed both by item on the survey as well as collected and measured overall. As you can see on this student performance on ethical research assessments graph, on the pretest, only 17.6% of students scored at the proficient or advanced level, and on the post-test, 64.8% scored at the proficient and advanced level. This was a dramatic increase, and although students did not meet my goal of 80% of them achieving the level of proficient or advanced, their growth was still significant and suggested that the strategies had been successful. This area model graph I felt like was more descriptive of the data for those ethical research assessments. And from here, it's easy to see that on the pretest, the majority of my students scored basic or below basic on the pretest, and that shifted to the majority of the students achieving proficient or advanced on the post-test. Again, the drop of below basic students from 40.8 to 7.2%, and the drop of basic students from 41.6% to 28% were both significant, as well as the increase of proficient scores from 16% to 55% being significant. Again, these suggest that the strategies were successful. On the student confidence in ethical research practices, it is also clear that the strategies seemed to be successful. There was clear growth on each of the identified questions, as well as the average level of confidence that students were able to increase. For this measurement, students were able to achieve my goal of 80% or higher of them reporting agree or strongly agree regarding their confidence for each of the identified areas. The overall growth, the percent of students achieving proficient and advanced on their research pretest and post-test was 47.2%, and the percent of students reporting strongly agree or agree increased by 39.4%. Again, I found both of these measurements to be significant and again suggested that the strategies had been successful. The implications of this study are threefold. Number one is that the varied engagement strategies allowed for more accessible material. Because there were varied strategies and different ways to experience the material, the changes made allowed students to have multiple exposures to the material with a lower risk of boredom or disengagement. Second, the increased confidence and increased achievement, I believe, go hand in hand. I added an extra question to the final survey in which students self-assessed their engagement level in relation to how they've improved on their skills or increased their knowledge of the content. It's clear that the vast majority of my students were able to acknowledge their level of engagement was high, as well as the fact that they improved some of their skills or increased their knowledge of the content. It was impressive to me that only one student out of all of my students reported that they were only somewhat engaged and were unsure of whether or not their skills had increased. The third way that the third implication is that you can't underestimate the importance of engagement. Weeks after the study ended, I am still seeing positive impacts of the study, and the unintentional benefit is that students are better able to transfer their learning. On new assessments and in new activities that I continue to create, students are still achieving at a high level and appear to continue to be confident in their skills. If I were to make changes to this study, there are two that I would suggest if anyone else were to replicate this study. Number one is that the study be done over a longer period of time. 2 weeks was a very short amount of time in order to complete all of these different activities, and the mini research project as well as the project-based learning experience both needed a greater amount of time, I believe, for students to be able to truly apply their knowledge. Because both of those activities were rushed, it's possible that those diminished the results of this study. The second thing that I would change is that I would add a data tracking component to the formative assessments. This would allow for more student reflection and could have had a greater impact on their increase in confidence or their increase in assessment scores. When giving out the results of this study, I believe that other teachers struggling to increase student confidence or performance on a particularly difficult or low motivation unit would benefit from the results of this study. I also believe that principals looking to provide encouragement or professional development to teachers of populations of low-performing students would benefit. Both of these groups would be able to use both the strategies that I included as well as some of the conclusions that I drew in order to benefit students regardless of their access to technology. In order to give these results out, there are 3 primary places where I intend to do this. Number 1 is in my English Language Arts content cadre that meets every few weeks to discuss engagement strategies, teaching strategies, assessment data, and my hope is to share that at the building level and then at the district level in a few weeks when we meet as an entire district. I also would like to share these results in a network of administrators that I've built up throughout my career. My goal is to send them an email with an attachment of the paper and a link to this video so that they can have a summary of my results and maybe better access to those results. And then my last area of dissemination would be social media. My focus has always been on Twitter, and I've included both of my Twitter handles. My goal is to have a more global audience for this, as student engagement is a highly researched and highly sought strategy. Thank you for listening to my presentation.